what I want to do is to tell you a story about Andy. It's a typical story about how Andy affected a person, two people actually. So a typical, Andy would just blow by my office and say a few words and then disappear. So one day he blows by, and it was in the summertime. He says, "You got to get down to Costco." I said, "Why do I have to go to Costco?" "You got to get down there now." "Why?" "Because they have got whole coho salmon, and for the whole fish, it's $3.50 a pound, and if they cut it up, it's $3.95. You got to go." So I said, "Okay, I'll go." So I forgot all about this, and about 2 days go by, and I'm in Costco, and they have, when they have those special sales, they have a little booth with a guy in there with ice, with the fish on the ice, and there's Andy, and I thought, oh my God, and then I remembered. And so I hid so he wouldn't see me. And he was bending, he was bending this young man's ear. This young man was about 25, and Andy had a poker or something, was showing him the lateral line and the operculum, and then he flipped the fish over and he was showing him the anal fin and telling him about the reproduction and how the fish die at the end of spawning. And this guy didn't cry or anything, but Andy was really into it. He just went on and on. And so finally Andy had already bought his fish, and he had his fish in his cart. And he left, and they said, "Go out and goodbye to each other." He left, and I came out and I said, "God, that old guy was going to talk your ear off." He said, "Yeah, but I learned so much about fish that I never knew. I didn't know any of this stuff he just told me." He said, "You know that guy?" And I said, yeah, that's Dr. Benson from Scripps. "Yeah?" He says, "What does he do?" I said, "Well, one of the things he does is he goes up to Alert Bay in British Columbia and works on salmon." And he said, "Oh man, I wish that guy would come back." And I said, "And I'll tell you something else that he did. He discovered what happens to CO2 in photosynthesis and how CO2 is fixed into carbohydrates." And this guy just, when he picked his jaw up from the floor, he looked at me, he said, "You mean he figured out photosynthesis?" I said, "Yeah, he did." He said, "Well, the next time he comes back, I'm going to ask him about photosynthesis." And I said, "Don't do that, because you're going to be there for an hour. And make sure, if you do, make sure there are no pens and paper around, nothing you can write on." And he said, "Well, what does he do at Scripps?" And I said, he's a professor." He said, "But he's so nice." And I said, "Yeah, some professors are nice, and have a good time with him if you see him again." So I'll always remember that about Andy. I never told Andy that story, and I didn't remember it until the other day when I told him, I related it to my wife. But I'll never forget Andy standing there with this poker, and this guy flipping the fish back and forth, and him pointing out all the anatomy and telling him all about it. It was wonderful. Andy just couldn't resist the moment to teach somebody something. Thank you.
Thanks, Vic. That's a great story. Claudia and Linnea, Andy's daughters, remember spending time with him on weekends in Yosemite and sleeping outside under the stars. Say he would take us out to dinner and we would sit discussing the heat capacity of coffee cups. He was so proud of knowing Russian letters and having been associated with the Marine Institute at Vladivostok in Russia. He was on an island taking pictures of sea lions real close up, and all of a sudden they took off after him and he had to run for his life. When asked by his friend Govinji, "What is your secret to long life?" Andy said, "Well, I eat for lunch canned sardines made in Norway." In closing, I would like to ask for us to all raise our glasses. Do you mind? And a toast to Andrew Alm Benson, a great man, scientist, and friend. Hallelujah. And now, before you go and mingle and partake of the food, please keep in mind that there are some bookmarks, a great photograph of Andy and on one side, and then which one is it? Asplenium caudatum, a fern on the other, appropriately, and the saying that Arthur spoke of earlier on it as well. Please put it into your favorite book, and when you open it, think of Andy. Thank you.